So, what a great game last night. I'm still buzzing from what I saw. I'm not talking about the US Ecuador game. I realized that happened. I did not go, actually. It was my wife's birthday yesterday, and we were at ACL. And in the midst of that, while Hozier was Hoziering, I got to partake in some playoff baseball. My beloved Seattle Mariners were up against the Detroit Tigers. When I got home, I continued to watch the game. It went 15 innings. It would never end. And the Mariners did triumph. If you think that soccer has dead patches with moments of intense excitement, baseball does that in spades, even beyond what soccer does.
If you're looking for boring moments, baseball's got you covered.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies. Namely, it's been a horrible week for us. That is what Nico Estévez said. Moisés, I hope it has not been a horrible week for you, even though that St. Louis game was pretty horrible, I would say.
It was rough, but I have maybe a bit of a contrary take on it. I mean, as a loss, yeah, it sucked, and everybody was exhausted, and nobody wanted to see another loss. Anybody in the stands, those of us in the press box, anybody on the field. But one of the things that stood out to me as I spent literally the whole game standing out on the porch outside, because I wanted to soak in and feel how the vibes felt as compared to the US Open Cup final, where the stands were completely packed. Everybody was in unison, doing the chants, doing the songs. It felt like the really golden days of the golden run of 2022. And even though the stands were not as full, what surprised me was the undaunted spirit within them, the
Okay.
energy coming from the south end, the energy coming from the rest of the stadium. And despite it being a loss, despite it being a horrible week overall when it came to the results, the Svatak goal that he refused the traditional celebration and was just like, let's keep moving, let's keep going. As exhausted as the players were, that I did not see them give up and fold, which a lesser team would, a less together locker room would. As not optimistic of a night as it was, I was surprised by how buoyed by optimism I was regardless. Another rough instance of trying to get player interviews in a locker room after a punishing loss, after a previous 72 hours punishing loss. But yeah, overall, the Stuver save record sailed past us into the history books on a not exactly remarkable save. And it was the close to a rough week of a long campaign, is the way that it felt to me.
Yeah, and I was really surprised in the post match. I was asking the first question, and I wanted to get something more about the just the recovering from obviously what had been a bad week and thinking about again these late season swoons that Austin's had. I mean, even in 2022, they had their playoff clinching match against RSL preceded by three straight losses, which were a really worrisome three straight losses. You'll remember that, Felipe Martins was lashing out at the media around that time, and they were not delivering the results necessarily to back that up, to quell that criticism that we had of them at that point. So that worried me, and I was kind of expecting more of maybe a feisty answer. I was expecting more kind of fight in that, and just that Nico kind of sounded so, I don't know, defeated necessarily, but certainly discouraged, disheartened. Just surprised me a little bit and worried me a little bit. But it seems like everything's kind of back to normal now, judging from yesterday's press conference. And we'll get into the LAFC stuff in a second here, because there's a lot of kind of interesting storylines with the preview. But just concerned still about just the mentality of this team a little bit. I definitely think they're more together than they were last year, so I think that's going to go a long way. But certainly you have back-to-back losses like that. I mean, again, I was expecting more of a response against St. Louis. I was expecting them to be kind of more mad, more feisty, to kind of take out those frustrations on a team that has already been eliminated from the playoffs. But I did not see that happen. Clearly, they were still hurting from Wednesday, and it still really showed.
Yeah, I don't know that I underlined this to you as directly as I could have, but I was expecting a loss against St. Louis after how brutal the Open Cup final read to me. I frankly was, I wouldn't say on the pessimist side, but I was on, for me, the realist side of seeing the way that it really deeply affected these guys. And regardless of how much they rotated, there's only so much that you can rotate when you've got to field the best squad that you can. And that's really what it came down to. Was I just saw absolute exhaustion, which there's only so much that you can do about it with a 72-hour turnaround, which,
Sure.
as I said in the previous episode, there's got to be something to be done about the fixture congestion, which is unlike any other top flight league on the planet, especially looking ahead to 2026 as a World Cup year. If they're completely shutting down during the World Cup, then where are they fitting Leagues Cup, and where are they fitting this, and where are they fitting that? That's what I keep thinking about here of late, is what is next year going to be like?
Oh, yeah.
To me, there's having a week of rest in between that St. Louis match, and I know we're getting ahead a little bit of the LAFC talk. A week of turnaround does a lot to completely change physical fitness level, mental agility, all of that. And some of the calculation that is going into things, and again, this is getting ahead of things, is that Austin fans should want St. Louis and Dallas to win this weekend so that Austin can avoid the wild card game. And to me, the more optimistic take and the better footing for this club going into the playoffs is Austin winning outright against LAFC, which puts their floor at 6th place and means they avoid the wild card game itself. I think that the sort of catastrophizing that we got used to over the last couple of seasons is not helpful when it comes to going, you've got to look at the worst case scenarios, as I did in an article that'll take you a quarter of an hour to read.
You looked at every scenario.
Looked at every scenario. I looked all across the multiverse. It is important to look at those, but I think the big reason that I dug in and did all of that on Sunday night is that I don't think it's as likely that this club, with the way that they have weathered various difficult storms, should be settling for the hello darkness, my old friend scenario of assuming that they're going to lose 2 straight in their final 2 league matches and have to rely on other math to keep them out of the play-in game. And that's the thing that I have seen across this season, is that this is a group that, for whatever their challenges, whatever their interpersonal conflicts might be, that they're very good at keeping a lid on. I don't think that one should count them out. I don't know that many odds makers really thought that they were going to make it to the US Open Cup final, and they didn't make it there on a fluke. They made it by playing their asses off. And I think they're still capable of that, but we'll see what kind of shape they're actually in based on how they show up on Sunday. We can try to speculate on it as much as we want. And the unfortunate thing is the recency bias of, let's look at the 2 most recent results and the 2 most recent opportunities we've had to see the way that they work. But since those losses, something I brought up in the press conference is I watched this video the club put out that took us behind the scenes of the Sporting Kansas City match. And we get those brief glimpses of the huddle, of the halftime talk, of the actual locker room environment, which in one of your write-ups this week, you mentioned something that Stuver said to us in one of those conversations about how much of a tight-knit group they are, how everybody has to be able to take criticism, everybody has to be able to give criticism, and that's why things work. And it felt like we got to see a bit more of that. And when we're not in a vacuum and just having to imagine stuff, it's easier to believe in the possibility of hope, is the way that I feel about it. And I think the more looks behind the curtain we can get as media, as people who follow the club in general, I think that might turn around something that Nico referred to in the midweek press conference as this narrative of their cratering or something like that, which, to be fair to us, is not what your publication has been putting out there, but it is something that other folks have been putting out there. And that
Right.
each time there has been a backslide, there has been a default lever to the club is falling apart. Everybody wants to leave. Everybody wants to find new jobs. Nobody likes being here, which I guess every single player we talk to is lying, because every single one of these guys that we talk to, they like being here. They wouldn't be here if they didn't like being here. And it's something that when we are not facing a vacuum, I think it's easier for us to stay away from the catastrophizing zone, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. But they did make the playoffs.
They did.
That's good. So thank you, Vancouver. That happened on Sunday. And also, to be quite honest, thank you, run that they had during the summer, because that's really where they made up all that ground after, of course, the very difficult May that they had. But we knew that was going to be a difficult May just because, again, of the amounts of matches that they had against playoff caliber teams in that month. And lo and behold, once they got out of that and got a little bit easier schedule, they stepped up and they won a bunch of games and got the results they needed to. So they're here. They're in the playoffs. First time since 2022. That's definitely a positive for the season. Making the Open Cup finals. You would take this season if you were given this at the start. So it's just what they do with it the rest of the way, starting with LAFC, which happens on Sunday. Of course, that is the makeup game of what happened in July. And I've got a few notes here. So Matthew Doyle did a preview. Matthew Doyle, by the way, is very enamored of the horrible week quote that we got. So he gave a shout out to Verde all day, and then he mentioned it again in his preview. So I think that that's going to be the drumbeat for this part of the season for the mothership as they cover Austin FC sparingly, admittedly, right? So I don't know that they're necessarily going to be a marquee team come the playoffs. But again, if they score an upset in the first round, then, who knows? Anything is possible. So that article got into who is the most underrated. Owen Wolf or Mark Delgado. He is no longer Marky, of course. He is Mark. You will remember him from past Galaxy matches where he did not necessarily endear himself to Austin fans. He is,
to put it mildly.
To put it mildly. So he is with LAFC now. They are coming off a 2-0 win over Toronto. They actually have a 6-match win streak going right now. They lost last to San Diego on August 30th. So September and October so far, it has been nothing but winning for LAFC. LAFC is, though, they have some incentive. They're wanting to get out of that 4-5 match with Seattle, which they'd be plugged into right now. I think that that's going to actually be a really tough matchup for them. I do see the possibility of LAFC getting past fourth, certainly, but that would start with a win or a draw over Austin. And of course, a win on Sunday would really help Austin in terms of their playoff prospects and avoiding the play-in game, which I think we all want to do. So fans, media, players, coaches, I don't think anybody wants to have that midweek 8-9 matchup that's going to happen. And then a draw gets LAFC to back-to-back 60-point seasons, and that would be the first team that's done that, the only team that's done that since 2015-16 FC Dallas. So there's a little bit of trivia for y'all.
And I think in terms of what people need, there's the points of it, and there is the spiritual aspect of a win against LAFC. Admittedly, yes, an LAFC without Son and Bawanga. One of my favorite Nico quotes. There's always something that I like from each midweek availability. He always gives something that I enjoy. And I think my favorite was they're missing 2 DPs, we're missing 2 DPs, including
Vasquez.
And I'm like, I appreciate that he mentions this not as an excuse, but as just a plain fact of when you look at horrible weeks, and there have been horrible weeks peppered throughout this season. One of those horrible weeks was having one of your DPs go out on a season-ending injury weeks and weeks before the end of said season. And that's something that I appreciate the way that he cases it, not as an excuse, but as a reality of this is a thing that we have to deal with and have had to deal with. And it is a greater level of adversity than many other teams have had to deal with. And even though LAFC is without 2 guys just for a couple of games, Austin has been out one of their 3 DPs for a significant amount of time. And I think that there is an advantage to them having had to work to cohere without that piece. But if you watch that Toronto game, on the one hand, it was kind of surprising to me that it took LAFC as long as it did to score that to score. But the most relevant to Sunday thing that came to me is that Austin should be very concerned about Jeremy Obobisi, who has as much to prove himself on his own as LAFC does as a team, as Austin does as a team, and he showed it on Wednesday. Can the rest of their squad surrounding him do that on Sunday? I guess we'll see.
Yeah, so I mean, Abobasi got that first goal inside of 15 minutes, but that insurance goal was a long time coming and finally came pretty late in the game. And then Toronto capped things off by getting a red in the 90th plus 9 minutes. So that was the thing they did. It's been a weird season for Toronto. They had rattled off a whole series of draws. I think they had like 8 straight draws. So it was kind of the least impressive string of results that maybe any team has gotten in MLS history. But yeah, so LAFC, I mean, yeah, Bobasi does really concern me. They've obviously still got a really talented squad. Of course, Steve Cherundolo, he is in his last season with LAFC. He is apparently bound back for Germany. So we shall see how that goes. You think that there's kind of a win-win for the Dolo kind of mentality that LAFC's got going? I think we've been talking about that a little bit behind the scenes here.
Yeah, I think so. That's an aspect of it, is something that I think Ilie mentioned earlier this season, is regarding expectations. People have looked at Austin and said, oh, this team's no good. Oh, they can't do anything. And yet they progress the way that they did in Open Cup. They've had the good spells that they have dealing with adversity. And he said that people would say similar things when he was at Kansas City, when he was at LAFC. And that's been a marker of Cherundolo's tenure, is, oh, this guy's the greatest. Oh my God, he's unstoppable. Oh man, his teams are just the best. But it took him a while to get that star. But they did. And they mounted, to me, one of the best MLS Cup matches that I've ever seen. That was incredible soccer. That was absolute scenes. That's what the league should want out of it every season. They have had those dips. And I think that the story of the LAFC we see going into the playoffs is going to be characterized by these last couple of matches they have to play, where they have points that could launch them to the top of the table, as I put in the playoff zone article. But to get there, they've got to get over this Austin-shaped hump in their remaining schedule, is the thing.
Right. Without Sun and Bawanga, which of course that's going to be a lot of the LAFC playoff story, obviously, is how far can those two players take them? Because I mean, they are a complete team, but also like those two players are going to take them kind of as far as they're going to go.
And I mean, look at their recent run of form. Like how many of those games, literally all of their goals were scored by those two guys?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
If you're so completely reliant on those dudes, what happens when Bawanga tweaks his knee or Sun pulls a hammy or something? That can derail things really, really fast. Additionally, there is that thing of, and we'll get into some playoff match stuff, and I know that you have a bold prediction that you've kept secret, and I'm glad that you have, because I love it. I love it when you have something to spring on me. What happens when you're an LAFC that is riding high on the fumes of the Son Heung-min signing and have this incredible late season run of form, and then you show up into the playoffs with the overconfidence of, we are better than these jokers, and you play, say, in Austin with something to prove in the first round. And Austin shows up in ways that people don't expect, like they did in the U.S. Open Cup semifinal against Minnesota, another top team in the West. What happens when that happens? And those kinds of narratives you have really delightfully spelled out to people who doubt lower ranked teams going into the playoffs. You know, what happens with a Red Bulls? What happens with a this? What happens with a that? That's one of the things that to me characterizes MLS playoffs, is literally all bets are off. You really cannot make assumptions.
Yeah, I go back to last year and just the Atlanta upset of Inter Miami. Like on paper, that absolutely should not have happened, but Guzan showed up huge and Atlanta found play within them that they hadn't really had all season, and they beat the favorites, they beat the darlings. And I mean, this is the year that the Miami team is going to get broken up. You're not going to have Busquets there. It's definitely going to look different. Suarez is going to be a year older, so that window is closing pretty swiftly, I think, even with Messi there. So should be interesting. So yeah, actually my bold prediction will segue us into playoff talk. So, and it's kind of more of like an expectation of MLS. And what that is that the most MLS thing is that Austin would beat LAFC on Sunday en route to drawing LAFC in the playoffs.
Yeah. I had a feeling that was where you were going to
Yeah.
go, and I'm glad that my guess was right. It feels to me like that could be one of the more energetic playoff pairings. There is the notion of the US Open Cup semifinal rematch against Minnesota. As I got into in the playoff zone article, completely possible that it could happen, but because the top four of the West is still such a moving target, thanks to the fact that both Vancouver and LAFC have to play an extra game on top of decision day, that's something that we'll know better on the other side of Sunday. Not just the four matches that play tonight, Saturday, as we record this, but it's interesting that those two lingering, interesting, continuing storylines from the season could be part of this, but it could also end up that Austin, and it is not just mathematically possible or even probable. I wouldn't even put it at a coin flip, but it is entirely theoretically possible that Austin ends up running into Vancouver or San Diego in the first round. Completely plausible. If Austin wins on Sunday, their floor is sixth place, and so they're missing the wild card game. They don't have to deal with any of that. It's a matter of who ends up in that third place spot.
Yeah, and right now it could actually, given the games in hand and all that, just looking at the table right now, it could be San Diego dropping to that third spot. I would not be surprised in that at all. I do think, yeah, again, Minnesota, they're in fourth right now on 58 points, and they only have one game left to play. LAFC, they're in third. They're on 59 with 32 games. Vancouver, second with 60, 32 games. San Diego, 60, 33 games. Yeah, I feel like maybe that Minnesota-Seattle pairing is what it's going to be for the 4-5. And yeah, right now, the way that it shifts, it's does LAFC get above third, and does Austin avoid that? None of those top three teams are in picnic, so there is that. Yeah, those are going to be tough. But again, yeah, LAFC, Austin, there's a lot of narrative. There's a lot of history there that would, soccer gods wise, I think make a lot of sense. But again, it's a lot of it now is going to hinge on Sunday. I think Sunday is way more important than we knew it was going to be important when that match got rescheduled to that. We also knew that was going to mess up my ACL Sunday. So like and the bag policy is what's getting me. I had a whole like kind of thing worked out where I was going to ride my bike to the festival, see some of the bands I wanted to see, and then bike back and catch the train. But I'm not going to be able to take my laptop with me into ACL because I don't have a clear bag that big. And it just also seems weird to be lugging a backpack around all day with the laptop in it. So I'm gonna skip the festivity Sunday, and I'm just gonna go to the game. So
the sacrifices we make, Phil.
Yeah. So no wet leg or the dare or Lucius for me. So but enough of my woes.
Well, let me throw a little bit more table math stuff from the article that I wrote. Things about it will change following the Saturday night results, but it's something that I wanted to write it specifically so that it was a bit of a reference point and took into account some of the relative things that could happen. It is still mathematically, until that Seattle game plays tonight, it is still 100% mathematically possible that Austin ends up in fifth place. And crazier things have happened. Crazier things have absolutely happened. But it does require Seattle to basically just not pick up any points. If they pick up a single point between tonight and decision day, there is a path for Austin to do it, but Austin has to win both remaining games outright, and Seattle does have to lose on decision day. I think you're right to look at the Seattle-Minnesota 4th-5th thing as possibly the most likely thing that we feel like we can bank on, but oh boy, those are dangerous words to speak. You bringing up San Diego as a possibility, to me, narrative-wise, that is a different continuation of a narrative where, remember when nobody thought that Austin was going to beat San Diego earlier in the season, and they did?
Yep.
Granted, they were missing Chucky Lozano. Granted, but that's missing one piece. That matchup to me was very much a coach v coach matchup where Nico saw where Mikey Varas was going before Mikey Varas went there, and Mikey figured his stuff out by the next time Austin and San Diego played. It would be for Austin to have them in the first round and beat them in the first round would be a narrative confounding thing, in the same way that people, I think, for the most part, did not expect across the league, did not expect Austin to beat Minnesota in that U.S. Open Cup semifinal. There was the people doubting Austin narrative going on. And something that you've touched on a couple of times is changing narratives and evolving narratives and growing narratives in this fifth year of the club. And I think that there is something to Austin confounding whether slumps or streaks are the only thing that defines them. And unfortunately, over history, more of the math is about having those downward swings. The other most interesting thing that Nico said to me in the midweek presser was that I asked how he felt about this LAFC match as a reschedule, as an opportunity. Would he have rather had it back on July 4th weekend and theoretically won, lost, or drawn or whatever? And he very bluntly just said that it gives them an opportunity for redemption. And I think that that's a very sober-minded way to look at this. And if the narrative ends up turning in terms of people's expectations of the playoffs based on how Austin does against LAFC this weekend, that could be great. And it could be a very, very late season point of collapse. But it didn't sound like he was hedging against that possibility happening, even though he accepts that that possibility could happen. It could totally be that one of his guys that he is expecting to show up at 110% is just out in space during the U.S. Open Cup final, inexplicably. That was one of those uncharacteristic things that literally the last thing I expected was something like that. And that isn't to say that I pegged the entire game on him or something, but just using it as an example. But back on the table math of it, it's not that Austin needs the win this weekend to just make playoffs possible or doable. It's that it completely colors their own expectations, their own mindset, their own ability to lock in the way that they did during what I think is a U.S. Open Cup run that they can and should be very proud of, all the way to the way that they went into that final. I think that the sobering aspect of that loss is something that, to an extent, steals nerves when you actually have 7 days of rest to rely on for your body and your mind to properly reset and refocus on things. So I mentioned this to you. I think I'm going to throw together an update to the playoff math article, taking into account the results, both LAFC's win against Toronto at midweek and whatever happens in these four matches tonight going into tomorrow, just as a here's where things stand, because we could be looking to a situation where Austin is already missing the wild card match because RSL and Dallas win tonight, which is one way of looking at it. But I don't love the vibe of relying on other results past the point of other results being what broke Austin into the playoffs because they put as many points into the table earlier in the season as they did. Relying on those results, to me, is bracing for a loss against LAFC. And I think that the players, the club, the fans really need the nitrous boost that a win against a much hated rival is actually capable of delivering.
And then speaking of much hated rivals, they go on the road to San Jose for decision day. So, which again, that will be good too, because again, if Austin does go far in these playoffs, they're going to have one home playoff match in that best of three, and then everything else pretty much is going to be on the road unless something really strange happens and like a 7 or an 8 team or a 9 team emerges, assuming that Austin locks into the 6th seed. And I don't think that's going to happen. I do think it's unlikely still that Austin gets out of the first round, but if they do, then I think it's going to be with 3 of those top 4 teams with them. The only other kind of possibility I see is Seattle obviously beating Minnesota. I mean, I could see that happening and them being in the mix. Even though Seattle can't get into top 4, I kind of consider them a top 4 team right now in terms of contention, just because, again, Minnesota, they are technically probably going to end up in fourth unless weird things happen. But also, they don't really have a striker at this point because Boa had the season-ending injury, and Tanny, of course, is at Villarreal right now. They do have some strikers ostensibly on the roster, but it's not the same thing. And I think that is going to catch up to them as good as Robin Lod has been and the other players that they have that help them get to that semifinal spot against Austin.
I think that's a very reasonable estimation. Schmetzer has been coaching his ass off and has the roster depth to contend with injuries and knocks and that sort of thing. And Minnesota is, you look at the attrition war that is the MLS season, and Minnesota is one of those that had a great season but has come out the other side of in-season play with a lot of gaping holes. And so even though the table says one thing, to me, I agree with you. Seattle is the actual other top 4 team in addition to San Diego, Vancouver, and LAFC. And I think that's spiritually, I think that's where that 4-5 matchup between Minnesota and Seattle feels right, even if Minnesota fans may not want to see it that way.
Oh, the Seattle LAFC would be pretty delicious if
it really would be.
Yeah, that would be a really fun first round matchup because that could be a conference final a lot of years. But the way that the math might work out, it might actually be a 3-game treat in the first round. So that's going to be, again, I love this time of year. On one hand, it's like I want to hurry up and get to the playoffs already, but just the math and permutations, and just, again, especially this year with all the shifts that are possible in the West and especially in the East, it's going to be a really interesting couple of weeks here. Weird that, this week happens during an international break and teams are not at full strength because it's a weird time to be trying to clinch the playoffs, but that is the schedule that we are given. That is the schedule congestion that we have. And so that is the climate in which we play. Of course, Austin has some players missing for this LAFC match themselves. We talked about Azuni. Pereira will be here, which is good. He didn't have to go to that friendly, which is helpful because obviously a few other players out for Austin as well. They're not as equipped as they need to be. Center backs would be nice. So I think we are down to 2, right? So got Heinzike and Djordjevic, who are going to likely be the starting pair on Sunday, which is an interesting pairing.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm going to throw into this update is some, as the song goes, spoon math. Looking at who is in the most unenviable place. Will it be the 2024 MLS Cup winners, LA Galaxy? Will it be Sporting Kansas City, Toronto, Montreal, Atlanta, or DC? That's the field of 6 that it mathematically could be, is the way that I've worked it out, sketched it out. I've got a favorite in mind and a juicy / odd note that I'll probably put into that prediction, provided it holds when I'm done writing this up. But some of this math does involve results from tonight. LA Galaxy playing at home against Dallas, Atlanta playing away against Miami, that will directly impact it. And it could take that field of 6 as we stand right now and make it a field of 4. If the two of them do well enough, I don't know. I haven't done the math yet, but I will do the math.
Yeah, for me, the Galaxy are playing Dallas, who are desperate to get wins to lock in a playoff spot. And just for sheer narrative, to go from first to worst in a season is pretty epic. So, of course, when you take Ricky Puig out of the equation, that's going to happen, right? That's going to be a test. Yeah. And so they've got Dallas, and then decision day, they've got...
On decision day,
Minnesota,
LA Galaxy, they have Minnesota.
Home. Okay, who's also going to be looking for wins to maybe avoid Seattle. So that'll be fun for the Galaxy.
Yeah. The Galaxy,
don't count out
the Galaxy having 2 straight home matches to act as spoilers for teams that really, really want those points. It's not that they've played especially great over the last month, but they have definitely shown signs of life and shown signs of something to prove.
Yeah. I guess in terms of spoon contention, don't count out DC United because they're pretty downtrodden right now.
Maybe they might be on the tip of my tongue, Phil. And there's a future looking thing of, if DC United end up with the spoon, what I think that could spell for them next season, actually.
Oh, which would be?
Fire the coach isn't the most useful thing at all times, but sometimes it leads to a really interesting hire the coach situation.
New coach just got there though. Like
Huh?
new coach just got there. Yeah.
Just got there. And I'm not saying that maybe that coach gets fired in the offseason, but maybe that coach gets fired part of the way into next season.
Yeah, I think they recently had a sporting director change as well. They're in pretty bad shape right now. And I think, yeah, also the sporting director they got, I don't know is necessarily qualified to be a sporting director. So it's gonna be interesting. I know someone from Arsenal America channels who's also a DC United season ticket holder, and he has given up his tickets after 14 years as a season ticket holder because he just could not take it anymore. So there's a little anecdote for you.
The Galaxy have two swings to extend our baseball reference from the cold open. They have two swings, whereas DC gets just the one shot. If LA wins against Dallas, then they're ahead of DC by 2 points. Looking at wins, LA Galaxy would beat them. If somehow on decision day, DC United and LA Galaxy are level on points, and LA Galaxy win against Dallas tonight, then on the wins tiebreaker, LA Galaxy would just barely edge DC United, and DC United would get the spoon.
Yeah. And then I was just chuckling because DC goes to Atlanta for decision day. So that's a game that almost nobody will watch.
I mean, here's the thing.
Unless you were interested in the spoon race. So,
yeah,
and you personally want to watch that.
Miami needs to show up against Atlanta tonight because they need the points in a very competitive Eastern Conference table. So I don't see them taking a night off, as it were. So, yeah, if Atlanta and DC go into decision day on the same number of points, DC will because they don't have a match before decision day. If Atlanta lose on decision day to DC leapfrog them by exactly 1 point.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this is depressing.
And this is the thing I keep trying to underline for people who follow Austin is that, can you imagine Austin being part of that whole conversation? Guess what? You don't have to.
Right.
You don't have to. Here's a free ticket out of Despairland.
It is good to be in the middle of the MLS pack.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Mid-table is a perfectly respectable place to be in one of the most challenging schedules and one of the most deceptively challenging leagues on the planet.
Right. And in the playoffs, anything is possible. Anything else before we put this one to bed here and get ourselves ready for Sunday?
Just one more thing. Austin FC2 won their decision day match, but missed the playoffs because of results elsewhere that were happening simultaneous. And I just felt it bore mentioning that in that developmental league that has its ups and downs, that has no VAR, that has sometimes wildly inconsistent officiating. Boy, if you complain about the top flight league, Next Pro is your oyster when it comes to officiating complaints. It was an interesting season that saw a lot of interesting new potential pieces for Austin's future developing and growing. Jorge Alastue, man, if he didn't require an international slot, what a fascinating roster flexibility piece he would be for the top club. I think there's a lot to be gained from following the developmental league if you have the time, if you have the bandwidth, if you can figure out whether the night's match is on Season Pass or on YouTube. I'm going to try to put something together in the waiting for playoffs to start doldrums that maybe kind of looks across that season, but no promises just yet because it might be a bit of an editing task that I'm not sure if I'll have the bandwidth for. But at some point between now and the end of the proper off season, I look to be cooking that together because I think there's a lot of stuff that people may miss from not paying attention that much to the club on that side of things. And I think that Brett Utley and his boys have a lot to be proud of in a season that was a continued part of a rebuild on their side of things. I look forward to what the future brings for Irvin Torres and some of the other really promising guys on that squad.
Yeah, for sure. And again, so obviously no more Austin FC2 games, no more trips to Palmer Field this season, but obviously they'll be back next season. And it doesn't seem like Utley's going to go anywhere, but wondering if he gets snatched up by a USL club in the off season or something like that too. So he's certainly had a good few years here so far.
Yeah. When I asked Burrell about the job he thought Utley has done earlier in the season, he sounded as positive as one could. I think a lot of people like to characterize that Burrell hates Next Pro and sees no purpose for it. And I think it's just a thing that that he has a particular perspective on, which is reasonable, and it has to be part of the overall roster build where they are controlling the destiny of the pieces that they have on that team. Alonso Ramirez, great player, but he was on a loan from Atlas that Atlas was never going to let Austin just have him on a free. And
Right.
so as great of a piece as he was, and as wonderful it is that there's a star over the Austin FC2 crest, that was not going to help the overall roster build in terms of continuing to pay the salary of a guy that they were developing for a top flight team in another country. And I think there are those kinds of pragmatic things that are less than the struggles of getting out from under some of the very difficult contracts that he and his sporting operation were saddled with when they came in, but nevertheless are also part of that, of getting their hands fully around and fully controlling who they have that they're able to classify as a homegrown, that they're able to bring in a U22, that they're able to bring in on some of these beneficial contracts that make it so that the extraordinary dearth of GAM is less of a hindrance than it is currently.
Those Austin FC2 stories, Valentino, well, kind of same thing, right? We knew that he had a ceiling that was probably not going to include MLS. If he could have gotten a green card, perhaps he would have been a supplemental player. He would have been like maybe kind of CJ Foley-esque in terms of his utility. But again, those are realities that teams have to face. And there's only a certain number of international slots, and you're not going to spend one of those on somebody who's on the MLS bubble. So there is that as well.
Well, Phil, enjoy ACL Saturday. What are you seeing today?
I'm seeing car seat headrest, and I'm seeing Doshi and earmuffing my 8-year-old during Doshi. So, although she's heard plenty. So
that's very MLS of you. Dochi on for Phil today.
Yep. 75,000 people crammed into a park on. So it seemed last night and Friday. I mean, Friday is supposed to be the quote unquote chill day. There were massive amounts of people. It was crazy. It kind of raised my hackles a little bit. I like going to the stadium. I like going to festivals, but just dealing with the mass of people can be daunting. That certainly was kind of the case, looking out from the kind of porch area tent thing next to the Empire of the Sun stage and just seeing sheer seas of people, and then Hozier doing his Hozier thing. So it was a lot, but we managed to skirt around that for part of it and saw Rilo Kiley, and that was nice. So it was good to see some old friends get back together and do their thing, and Jenny Lewis's delight. So enjoyed that. All right. That's I guess that's it. You're not doing any ACL stuff. You're not sneaking into Zilker Park.
Nope. Yeah. I'll see you later, Hozier.
This is the best thing I've heard in the history of the 8 years I've been on this planet.